known as Tomsy and Momsy. And we laugh, we cut up, we take care of them, we wait on them hand and foot and cater to them and just love them and honor them, and we have such a good time. You know, technology is something that the older generation struggles with. They're nearly 90 years old. And her dad got a new cell phone. Now, I still remember the first, I think maybe I was getting an iPhone for Sherry. I still have an Android type phone, and it's 7 years old, and there's things I can't download. That's too much, there's not enough space on my phone to download stuff. And for God's sake, don't update. You update it, it'll blow up. And which is their plan because they want you to go get a new one. So I'm real careful not to update. Tom says, John, I've been having some trouble with my cell phone. Can you take me to T-Mobile? Can you drive me to T-Mobile? I said, sure. Well, what's the problem? Well, we were coming down here to see you guys, and Beverly had my phone. I said, Beverly, text our buddy Kenny and let him know we're coming to town. And she got his phone. She says, Thomas, I can't. It's in Chinese. He's like, that's baloney. It's not in Chinese. No, it's in Chinese. So he pulls the car over and looks at his phone, doesn't know what to do, hands her the phone back, and starts driving towards our house. And he gets there and he's telling me this, and sure enough, I look at his text messages and it's in a foreign language. And so I start piddling with his phone and realize that he's gotten in 3 or 4 layers deep. Now, I commended him for that. I said, the fact that you could even get to the feature to change the language of your texting, I am impressed. So I was equally impressed when I found the same thing. And untabbed all, he had selected like 3 languages other than English as options to text in. This was Japanese, as it turns out. And so we took it to the, and I couldn't quite get it back to the normal text mode, so we took it in and got it all fixed. But we got a pretty good laugh about that, and just the idea that technology is supposed to make life convenient, but poor Tom was trying to text, but it was in Japanese. Couldn't do it. Oh my Lord. But they're on their way back home, and they had a nice time, and man, we really had a blast with them. Last week, we started a series because as I was just going through the week, I really felt God impressed me about this idea of Emmanuel. It's the name that the angel tells, the Spirit of God tells Joseph and Mary, this is what you're going to name Jesus, of the many names, Prince of Peace. And so here, Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. Say this after me. God is with me. Now, one of the revelations that we get from Jesus showing up on planet Earth is God announcing and declaring, hey, I'm with you. I've always been with you. I will always be with you. And so that was resonating in my heart last week, and I started looking at the story and thinking about Jesus showing up. When Jesus showed up, when God made that announcement, that's always been true, I'm with you. Jesus didn't show up in a world that was going easy peasy. Jesus shows up at a time when things are difficult. The world seems to be unraveling. There's oppression, there's loss, there's death, there's disease, there's difficulty, all this stuff. Jesus shows up during a time of suffering. And I thought, well, why then? You ever thought, well, why did Jesus show up then? Why not 1,000 years earlier? One of the reasons Jesus shows up during a time of suffering is to help you and I get the revelation that he shows up in my time of suffering too. He shows up in your time of need and suffering too. If there's one thing we could eliminate in life, if you'd raise your hand if someone said, you want to eliminate suffering in your life? You'd go, yes! If there's one thing we avoid or try to eliminate more than anything, it's suffering. I shared with you about a sociologist who had done a study and basically did a study with people and said, if you could get the script of your child's life or someone in your family's life, you could get the script and read it, and in the first 5 minutes of their life, you could edit anything you wanted. You get their script and you've got 5 minutes to edit it on the first day. What would you erase? Would you want to erase and cut out all the pain and suffering, all the grief, all the hardship. I'm part of a generation of adults that are called helicopter parents, where we swoop in and help our kids all the time. There to eliminate educational difficulties and relational challenges, and we don't want anybody mistreating them, nothing disappointing them. If you could wave a magic wand and you could erase every failure, every setback, all the suffering and all the pain, you could just wipe it away. Are you sure it would be a good idea for that child? Are you sure it would be a good idea in your life? Erasing all that, would it cause them to grow up more compassionate? Would it strengthen their perseverance? Would it cause them to be more generous, more warm-hearted and compassionate towards other people? Or is it possible that in some ways they would actually grow from difficulty? Is it possible that in some ways you grow? Is it possible that somehow I need adversity? That's a hard thing to say. Is it possible that you need adversity and you need setbacks and you need heartache to reach the fullest development and growth as a follower of Jesus, who said, take up your cross? Which, by the way, means there's going to be some heavy things and some painful things and some suffering and difficulty and, dare I say, some death. The Bible's got so many, and this is from our intro from last week, in James. Consider it pure joy, woohoo, when you face trials. What? Yeah, our Peter says, don't be surprised when fiery ordeals come and test you like something strange was happening. No, in the next verse, but rejoice, woo! Or Paul, 2 Corinthians 4, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving something. Something is happening when you go through suffering. Something's going on. You haven't been forgotten. You haven't been abandoned like it often feels like. God's not far away. He's actually, I think, profoundly as close to you as he will ever be in those moments where he seems so far away. Think about Jesus. My God, my God. Where did you go? Where are you? And you experience that moment on the cross yourself. You discover, just like Jesus did, the profound truth that God is fully with you. Paul writes this when he's in prison. Light and momentary afflictions. He's writing that, consider it pure joy, while he's about to be executed. Last week, I think I titled it last week, God is with you. From that idea of Emmanuel. Emmanuel, God is with you. God is with us. And then I personalize it a little more this week and say, God is with you. Say this after me. God is with me. And you can really add a little to that. God is with me in adversity. God is with me in difficulty. God is with me in loss, suffering, failure, divorce, pain. There's a whole long list of circumstances we've all walked through and experienced. And I want you to know something that's profoundly important for you. Is the realization God is with you in that. So important. And you see it over and over again in the Bible. There's tons of stories. Suffering. God is with me in suffering. God is with me in adversity. And I hope that you see that in that title. God is with you in the struggle, in the challenge, in the loss. You know, in some ways, I didn't grow up in church. And when I went to Baylor, I would go from time to time. I always pushed back against, I think, religion. The haughtiness, the arrogance feeling that sometimes you get from church people. And so I pushed back. And to my own detriment. So as a result, I barely went to church when I was at Baylor. From time to time I would go. And of course at school, on Sundays, in the cafeteria, everybody that had gone to church was all dressed up, so you knew they went to church. I would go, and then I'd go back to my dorm room and put my sweats on and show up looking like I just played intramural football. So I'm not saying that my attitude was correct, but I even then was pushing back from religion. Then when I left Banner and I got into church in Austin, Bob's church. You met Bob last week or so back. Was that last week or the week before? Week before. And they had a Bible school, and I went to 3 years in the Bible school and did some training there. And then started my church journey really at an intense level back in the 80s. And in some ways, as I got involved with church and I went to other churches and I listened to church messages, one of the things that I see now that I would humbly suggest, a message that was wrongly communicated by the church, was the idea that, well, if you just have enough faith, if you just have enough faith, brother, or if you'll just quote the right scripture the right way, and at the right volume too. The loudness part was important. And beat a drum naked in the forest. Just kidding. I'm like, just do the list, right? If you'll do all these things, then you're going to have a perfect marriage. Your kids will be amazing. You'll live a worry-free life. You'll be the envy of the Christian world. Pain-free life. No relational challenges. No family tension. No family pressure. No emotional. Now, don't understand that we need faith. We do need to, as a discipline, read the Word. Speak and declare the Word. To grow my trust in the Father. The Bible says faith comes by hearing. So, your faith will be determined by what you hear. So, if I was a fly on the wall, what are you hearing all day long? That's going to tell me where your faith is, where your confidence is. In man, in a political party, or in God. In spite of all that, in God. So, but yes, I need faith. I need faith to grow in my trust in the divine. You know what faith is? Faith is recognizing my inability. But, at the same time, recognizing God's ability. That's faith. To recognize my inability, God's ability. Where am I? You know, I heard Jaden talking about Susan. You gave him the song set for today. Could someone send me the message for next week? That's what I thought. That would help me out. No, faith is recognizing my inability and trusting God's ability. But here's the catch. Here's the subtle shift that I've made in maybe the last decade. I've learned that my growing my faith is not to avoid suffering. Becoming a disciplined follower of Jesus is not so I can avoid life's uncertainty and unexpected hurts and losses. No, it's so I can press through them. Having faith is not avoiding life suffering. Having faith is this journey where I discover God is with me in all of life, including the suffering. And when you realize that, you know what, God's with me in the whole thing. God never leaves me. God never forsakes me. That sounds so simple, but we go through a hardship or a difficulty, we're like, God, where are you? Where'd you go? He's right there with you. It's so important that you realize God never leaves you. God never forsakes you. He's always with you. Once I can really grasp that in my heart, and that's what I hope you get more than anything, once I make that move where I go, oh, God is with me, even more profoundly with me in my suffering, in my difficulty. Once I get that, then I discover, then I get to the liberating truth, which is that God's with me in all moments. The good moments and the joyous ones as well. That's faith. And here's why it's important. If I wrongly think that faith is what helps me avoid suffering and difficulty, then I will wrongly beat myself up when trials come my way, when losses come my way. Oh, I didn't have enough faith. I must have done something wrong. And you'll find plenty of church people that will tell you what it is. Yeah. I must have been in sin. No. This life has has suffering, heartache, loss, difficulty, challenge, heart baked into it. It's one of the ingredients that's part of the recipe, and you can't get away from it. And it's okay, because God's with you in it. Father, help this cup pass from me. No, Jesus walked through suffering first. Doesn't mean you'll avoid it. It means he's with you in it. He's profoundly one with all of humanity in suffering. We don't talk about this a lot in church. I talk about it a lot. I get it. I want you to get this, because once you recognize God's with you in everything, you can make it through anything. That's why Paul got it. He said, I can do all things through Christ. Yeah, if I wrongly think faith is what helps me avoid suffering and difficulty, then when some chaotic thing strikes my life, when a missile out of nowhere goes kaboom, I'm going to think, oh my gosh, what did I do? Wrong. Where did I mess it up? And there's regrets, and there's unnecessary regrets, and thoughts of, well, what if? And I could have, I should have, I would have. Life has suffering, hard baked. There's not a spiritual formula that exempts any person. I love self-help books. And there are some wonderful practical things we can all do in areas of our life. But the red flag for me is when someone says, I found the secret. And then makes gazillions of dollars selling that, because we all want the secret. We all want the shortcut. Man, we're programmed for shortcuts. And I realize how impatient I am when I got to wait in line somewhere. And that I have to grow in patience. Or how about this? You're looking up something, and you get the apple death wheel spin. Yeah. You're like, what is it taking? Because we're so impatient. We've lost the technique and the spiritual gift and fruit of patience. So all of us experience suffering and hardship. I was saying something profound there. I think it was about, it's the key. Let me give you the secret. You ready? Here's the secret. This is going to set you free. Get some pens and papers out. Ready? The secret to life is there is no secret. There you go. Now you can stop paying $1 gazillion for that podcast, or that book, or following that speaker who says they've got the secret 3 keys to a certain place in this 3rd level of the heavens. Baloney. None of us are exempt from the journey, but every one of us can recognize God is with me in it. The divine is with me in it and through it. And there's something very important happening. The reason why, just like that story, if you could go and erase all the difficulties of your child's life, the reason that would be horrific and keep them from persevering and growing and developing character and being more loving, it's no different for you. We walk through difficulties because there's something happening in it. I know it's not exciting when you're in a struggle. I know it's not exciting when you watch someone you love take their last breath. No, that's not an easy thing. Well, now what? The what? Yeah. And your spiritual, everything you thought just goes bam. And you're in a fog. But when I discover something's happening in those moments, I don't have to run from it. I can go into that moment with my Savior, with God. I'm not asking for God to bring difficult moments in my life. They happen in this earth. Until we're with Christ in the life after this life, we're going to encounter those things. I don't have to run from them. But when I discover I'm surrounded. Oh, okay. There's a battle in this journey. A battle for perseverance and character and growth. And a battle for me to become more compassionate and loving and more giving and more generous. And in my brief moment in this life, if I can give my life away to other people, then I can just get a taste of what it's like to be a follower of Jesus, who gave his entire life for you and for me. That's what we're called to do. Well, I don't like the story about all the disciples all died and some of them crucified upside down. And I don't like that. We don't read that very often. Being a disciple in the early days was almost a kiss of death. being a follower of Jesus almost certainly meant somewhere along the way, someone's going to slit your throat. Today it's easy. So easy. We're babies. I'm a baby. I'm talking to me too. That did seem a little harsh when I said that to y'all just now. But that's for me too. It's like, wake up. The challenge, the suffering, it's part of the journey. Don't like James said, what's it, or Peter? Like it's some mystery when trials hit you. No, it's part of the journey, but there's a reason for it. Let's look at why. So I wrote this down. Faith doesn't help you avoid suffering. It's faith that helps you through. Now, there's a good caveat, a side note here. There's a thing called wisdom. We'll talk about it another time. Wisdom can keep you from stupidity. Some of our suffering that I've had in my life is from something stupid I've done. Anybody ever done anything stupid? And you're like, gosh, why did I do that? Stupid! We all do stupid things, but wisdom's a beautiful trait that Solomon prayed for. He could have prayed for anything. He prays for wisdom. Wisdom can keep you from doing stupid things. Wisdom can help you in your financial journey. Wisdom can help you in relational things. Those are incredible. So don't hear what I'm not saying. But wisdom doesn't help you avoid the fundamental difficulty and challenge and suffering and heartache and loss that we all experience in life. And that's important to realize. Every one of you has seasons of suffering. Every one of you. Or hardship. Something's difficult emotionally. Or something's difficult physically and financially. At some level, some of you have lost friends. Some of you have lost family. Or a marriage broke up. Or a job. Listen to what Paul says in Romans 5. And he's writing these words while he's going through hardship and suffering. We rejoice in the hope. Say hope. Hope. Oh, come on. Say hope. Hope. We rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. We also rejoice in our sufferings. Because, and here's why. If that was period the end of the sentence, I'd be like, what? No, thank you. But there's a reason for difficulty. There's a reason that you feel crushed sometimes. Because like a diamond that's crushed and produces something beautiful, that pressure often comes. We're like, I don't want this. But there's something happening. Say this after me. When I'm under pressure, when I'm under pressure, God's up to something good. That'd be a good message title. I like that. We rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. We also rejoice in the sufferings. Why? Because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character. And character, say it, hope. And hope doesn't disappoint. Because God's poured out His love into our hearts. And it goes on. So the road of perseverance is paved with character and with hope, with suffering. Yeah. That's if you want character, if you want perseverance and then character and hope, guess what road you got to get on? The road of suffering. And I'm suggesting that you're on planet Earth anyway, so you're going to be on that road. In this passage, Paul repeats one word. I've already given it to you several times. What word is it? I think I even put it in bold print for you. Yes. Hope. When I've got hope, there's something I look forward to. When I have hope, I've got a sense of anticipation. I wake up in the morning excited about what God's got for the day. Let me tell you about something. When you're around someone who's got hope, it's contagious. It's infectious. It is. But on the other hand, if I find myself desperately wanting something, but I don't believe it's going to happen, very often I posture my heart in that scenario toward a future of just despair. Right? It's hard to live in love. It's hard to live in hope when you're in despair, and that's a painful place to be. One of the ways that people cope with despair is we shift our posture to a place of resignation. I give up. I give up. Yeah, that's a place of resignation. And one of the things we often do when we find ourselves in a place of just, we'll forget it, is we just lower our desire. We lower the measuring stick. We lower our expectation for things. You find yourself repeating over and over, oh, it's not that big a deal. Yeah, that's resignation. That job wouldn't have been that great anyway. Wouldn't have been that cool to live there in that place. She's not that pretty. He's not that handsome. There's lots of other fish in the sea. Resignation. Resignation. It's like the halfway house between despair and hope. You got despair over here, hope, resignation. It's the halfway house. Sometimes, it kind of feels like the best thing you can do. In some cases, it might be the best strategy. For example, if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan. We live down the road from, now I know my oldest, Joe, we got some 49er fans in here. There's still hope. See, you have hope. I grew up in Houston, so I've also rooted for Houston teams as well. But when we moved to the Waco area in the early 90s, we became Cowboys fans. All my kids, for the most part, except for Tyler, grew up, and everybody in Waco, kind of, you were around, you're going to school, people wearing Cowboys jerseys, so we became Cowboys fans. We always been Cowboys fans. Do I want the Cowboys to win? Do I believe they'll win? I'm not an idiot. They haven't made it to past the first round of the playoffs and won the game. I think it's the conference championship. That hadn't happened in decades. My children, this is a sad moment for a follower, a Cowboys follower. Except for you, Tyler. But my own children have not witnessed the Cowboys NFC Championship game, a victory. The last time was in 95, and they went to the Super Bowl in 96 and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. Sorry, Jeff. Jeff's in here. He's a Steelers fan. That was the last time. Do you realize that was in the 1900s? Can you fathom that was the last time? It's been 29 years, 28 years since they made it to the conference championship. So, I resign myself. Resignation. The halfway house between hope and despair. And I tell myself, after they live, it's not that big a deal. I've survived this long without a victory. So I adopt the strategy of resignation. Jesus did not go down the road of resignation. Jesus says, don't despair in life's hurts and losses. Don't be anxious. In other words, Jesus says, John, don't resign. See, Jesus says you've got a good reason for hope. And all of those who knew Jesus and followed Jesus had hope in Jesus. One of those who followed him was a guy named Paul, who went through enormous suffering. Paul never resigns himself to things. Here's Romans 15. Another 10 chapters later. May the God of all hope. Who's got all hope? The divine, God. May the God of all hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Spirit, by God's presence with you. Hope. And again, Paul repeats that word. During a crisis or adversity, something extraordinary is possible. It's possible for suffering to produce perseverance. Perseverance to produce character. And character to produce, yes, not resignation, but hope. And that's where we started last week. We looked at the opportunity and hope in the midst of adversity. God doesn't keep you from adversity. I wish at times that God did. But the journey of being a follower of Jesus is about discovering, whoa, God is with me in adversity. Not from it, but in it. Because it comes for everybody. And over the past 30 years as a pastor, or associate pastor in some of those years, I've talked and prayed for hundreds of people going through suffering and loss and hurt, painful. It's interesting that over the 30-year period, there's been a ton of research done on how some people don't actually just get through suffering. They actually get stronger. Because remember when I told you a moment ago that something's happening in your difficulty? Something's happening when you feel pressed on all sides? Something good is happening. It's important that I see that even when I'm crying out in pain. Yeah, they discovered that some people that don't just go through suffering, they actually get stronger. We tend to hear a lot today about post-traumatic stress. But recently there's been a lot of talk about something called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. Where someone who goes through hardship doesn't just make it through to the other side, they actually come out different. They come out stronger. They come out more compassionate towards others suffering and pain. They come out with a sense that every moment and every breath is a gift from the divine. Woo! Yeah. Now, it doesn't happen automatically. You don't just flip a switch. And the truth is, adversity and suffering, when I went through loss, honestly, it kind of crippled me at first. I didn't just jump up. The people around you want you to get over things quickly. It's harder on people watching you go through hurt and suffering. But if they would also embrace the reality that something good's happening. You're surrounded. You're surrounded. God's up to something in your life. But it often does bring difficulty. So what makes the difference, though? What makes the difference? And a lot of it rests on how I respond to it, which is what I'm trying to help you with today. Help you see something. Oh, okay. Hadn't navigated it with that shift quite yet in my life. Realizing, oh, okay, God's with me in this. Not too long ago, I finished reading a book by a guy named Viktor Frankl. I was going to read some stuff that I had read from it, but I know I'm kind of cruising along here quite a bit. So probably his most read book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's his incredible account of surviving the German concentration camps. He was a brilliant individual. He was an Austrian. He was an Austrian neurologist. And he'd already written tons of books. He was a prominent doctor. He was well known in the U.S. at the time. He worked in the hospital in Vienna. And after Hitler started occupying Austria, the U.S. consulate had made arrangements for Viktor Frankl to get a visa to the U.S. so he could come and finish his work and his teaching and pass on all of his knowledge. So he could avoid the concentration camps. He could avoid, actually they called them the extermination camps, is what they were called. But he had family that couldn't go. And he writes in the preface of this book, before he passed away, he did an updated preface to the book. He talked about how he was conflicted. But in the end, and he was asking for a sign from God, and one day he found a piece that was left from a place of worship that the Germans had demolished. His father had taken a piece of one of the stones from the building and had it on the coffee table in their house. And it had one of the Hebrew letters from the Ten Commandments on it. And his father always told him that's from one of the Ten Commandments. And he said, which one? He said, honor your mother and father, and they will be well with you. So he stayed. He stayed with his parents. They were all taken. His father, his mother, his brother, his wife, an unborn child, all died. A number of years later, he was freed, and he sat down to document his experience, and he wrote this Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. The #1 best-selling book. How do you overcome that kind of horrific? I was interested to hear his experience, because none of us have gone through something like that. But what from that can help me live in my moments of life that I think are so tragic and difficult? So he writes this down. So how do you overcome adversity? Some of you are experiencing adversity right now. So from his own experience, he emphasizes that the key was not the difficulty, but how he responded to it. We've heard that before. He said this: the sort of person that the prisoner became was the result of an inner decision and not the result of camp influences alone. He said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. You can choose your attitude. Like I said, we're babies. We gripe about the silliest things in our world. But I can choose to have an attitude in the middle of my challenge and difficulty. And just a finishing thought today to say a little more about Joseph. I finally got to it. That's the story we looked at. A great story about how God's with me in adversity. Yeah, look at Joseph. He's 17 years old. He's got the world by the tail. All of a sudden, his world collapses. And as it does in our lives, his brothers betray him. He's sold into slavery. But then something remarkable happens in slavery. He thrives. He does some of his best work in that difficult place. You know, in the ancient world, slavery was just a part of the culture, part of that world. Back in that day, slavery was basically a power deal. Some oppressive nation would come in, and the people that were taken over became slaves. If you were a military power, that's what you did. You lose the battle, you become slave. And so as a slave, it was possible to gain responsibility and potentially kind of rise to a higher position. Now put yourself in Joseph's place for just a second. You're 17 years old. You got your daddy's favorite. Because remember, he wore the robe. He got to wear the special robe. The brothers are jealous. Then all of a sudden they strip him, put blood on the robe, tell dad he's dead, and here comes a caravan headed down to Egypt. They sell him. And he becomes a slave for a guy named Potiphar. So it's his very first day. By the way, do you remember your first day on your first job? Imagine it's your first day on the job, and you're a slave. You think you might have a little attitude? Yeah. Like you might have a little attitude, or if that was your situation. But this remarkable thing happens. We're told in the story that the Lord is with Joseph. He gets whatever assignment he does on whatever day, and he actually works with diligence. He works with excellence. He treats the people around him like human beings. And he actually does the tasks that he's assigned with as if he's working for someone besides Potiphar. Well, that's a perspective. That's a way to do what we do with excellence. So the overseers notice Joseph and they give him more. He does so well at that, word finally gets to Potiphar about this guy. And turns out Potiphar was this high-ranking official in Pharaoh's administration. So he moves Joseph into his house and makes him his personal assistant. He gives him the managerial responsibility over everything that he does. Joseph does great with that. So Potiphar makes him his personal assistant, makes him a CEO. I mean, Potiphar had access to all the Harvard MBAs, the top people in the land. But he's got Joseph, who runs it all, who's got a, GED from high school. He works his way to the top of the organization. Everyone's doing great. Genesis 39, verse 5 and 6. From the time Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his own household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he didn't concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now, I want you to pause here for just a second. And note, as I've said, something can happen in adversity. Suffering's not something you ask for. No one asks for it. But something good can come out of it. When you suffer, sometimes you find yourself rising to the challenge. And then you rise to that challenge and it reveals abilities you wouldn't have otherwise seen. They wouldn't have surfaced otherwise. That's what happens to Joseph. Joseph's betrayed, sold into slavery. You come on, JB. He's forced into a foreign land. Imagine selling you to a place you lose your family, you lose your language, you lose all your provisions. He's alone, no friends, no money, and he flourishes in the middle of all that. That's why I think it's such a profound story. People often say things like, I could never go through what that person went through. I could never stand to lose that. I would never suffer that. I wouldn't make it. You never know. You never know until one day you do go through difficulty and you realize, when Anna passed away, I thought I would die that year. I don't know if I've shared that with anybody. Other than my kiddos, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. But after 1 year passed, God reminded me that I'd said that. No, you thought you wouldn't be here, John. You're still here breathing. Surprise! You've made it this far. Your heart's still beating. The world goes on. You made it through it because I am with you. And then suddenly, like Joseph, you find out, wow, God's with me in ways I never expected. And then after you go through suffering or loss and you find out, oh, God's with me, you realize I can handle whatever life has to throw at me. I can handle from this day forward whatever life's got. When you go through a hardship like that and you come out pressed and you grow and you persevere, you realize, okay, I can make it. It looks like I'm surrounded, but oh, I am surrounded by an amazing Creator, a loving God. Paul put it like this: I've learned what it is to be in need and have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content, of being alive in any situation. Because I can do all things through God, who strengthens me. I have hope. And guess what? Joseph persevered, right? But one of the things about Joseph is Joseph doesn't have that perspective of realizing God's with him until he's gone through difficulty. And we hadn't even finished the story. We'll look at some more next week. His trials aren't over. You're like, hey, hadn't he gone through enough? If you have the courage to actually make changes in your life, something can happen in your soul. If you actually have the courage to make change. Now, January's come and gone. February, I think, is a good time to make a commitment. It's a shorter month, by the way, among other things. But if you're going to have the courage to make changes in the area you know, then something can happen in your soul. Suffering can lead to perseverance. And that can lead to character. And it can lead to hope. Being a follower of Christ isn't about freedom from all the heartache and difficulty. No, it's finding freedom and hope in the middle of all that difficulty. Well, what do you do when what you're hoping for doesn't work out? It happened to Joseph. It's happened to me and you. What do you do when you lose your family like Joseph did? What do you do when you lose your dream? What do you do when you get betrayed by somebody? Ouch. Or just plain forgotten by your friends? What do you do when you find yourself in a pit? You can live in despair. And a lot of bright people actually do. Sadly, I've read incredible stories about people that. You can live in resignation. That's the halfway house. That's the best I can do. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if I can do it. Look, they put Jesus on the cross. They hung him on the cross. They laid him in the tomb. They buried Jesus. And then the strangest thing happened. God was with Jesus in the tomb. Yeah, Jesus does great in the tomb. He gets exalted to the highest place. His life in the kingdom turns out to be this so strange because of all the suffering of Jesus becomes his glory. And we want to bypass the suffering part. We just want to jump to the big end. No, all of his suffering is what became his glory. And because he overcame death, and because he defeated all sin, and because he's resurrected, he gave you a promise. Gave me a promise. One day there will be a union. But between that day and this day, I've got hope. You've got hope. So no matter what adversity comes, you have an opportunity this morning. I'm going to choose hope. Hope in Him. Hope in His promise. Like the apostle said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You are my hope. Last time, Romans 15. Stand to your feet. Stand to your feet. Let's read this out loud together. I think I've got it in your notes. Romans 15. Ready? Everyone, let's sing it out. Ready? May the God of all hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Spirit, by God's presence with you. We'll finish this series next week. But today you go out with hope. Father, I pray your blessing on everyone here today. Lord, you know everybody in this room. God, you know every longing that we have. You know our aches, you know our sufferings, you know our difficulties, you know our heartaches and our loss. Father, just pray for a sense of your presence in your life to fill each one. Lord, you know our longing for hope. You do. And so this morning I pray that you'll speak to each heart. God's able to speak to your heart very specifically today. Whatever the need is, whatever it is you need to hear, the voice of the Father say, I love you, I am your hope, I am your promise, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Father, we open up our hearts to those precious words that you have for us today. In Jesus' name, amen.